The first thing I noticed was the sound, the kind of sound you don't normally hear at 2 in the morning unless something's wrong. It was faint, a whisper of movement over the carpet in my bedroom. I lay still, the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the steady tap of rain against my window, providing the familiar background noise of my Tacoma neighborhood. But this was different. I opened my eyes just enough to catch the dim blue glow of a phone's flashlight cutting across the room. My dresser drawer gave a slow, deliberate creak, the kind that doesn't happen by accident. My breath caught. Through the sliver between my lashes, I saw her, my mother, Zariah, moving with the precision of someone who knows exactly what she's looking for. Her hand slipped into my purse hanging on the chair. The flashlight beam glinted briefly off a gold wedding band she hadn't worn in years, now loose on her finger. That tiny flicker of light felt like a knife twisting in my chest. There's a particular kind of silence that happens in the moment before trust breaks. It's the pause before you admit to yourself that you've just seen something you can't unsee. I stayed motionless, willing my breathing to remain steady. Confronting her right then would wake the whole house, and I had no proof, only the image burned into my mind. She didn't fumble or hesitate. She pulled my debit card from my wallet like she'd done it 100 times, then quietly backed out of the room. The door clicked shut with careful gentleness, as if the performance mattered more than the act. The faint scent of her perfume, white linen, lingered behind. It used to mean safety. Now it felt foreign, almost mocking. I stared into the darkness for a long time after she left, every muscle rigid. My heart pounded, but my mind was already working. In my family, the difference between borrowing and stealing depended entirely on who was telling the story. I'd learned a long time ago that survival in this house meant knowing more than they thought you did, and holding it until the right moment. When I finally drifted into a light, restless sleep, it didn't last. Morning light slipped through the blinds, and my phone began to vibrate on the nightstand. I reached for it, expecting maybe a weather alert or a message from work, but instead I saw a string of bank notifications stacked one after another. My stomach tightened as I opened the first, a $3,000 cash withdrawal at 2:14 a.m. The next, $5,000 transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Then 2 point-of-sale charges, one $200 and one $500, both at high-end stores. The list kept going. Between 2:14 and 5:12 a.m., my account had been drained almost to zero. I pulled up the full account page, hoping I was wrong, but there it was, my balance reduced to a number that wouldn't cover a week's groceries. The money that was supposed to be my safety net, my down payment on the condo I'd been saving for over 5 years, was gone. I'd built that fund dollar by dollar. Extra shifts, skipped vacations, saying no to dinners out with friends because I had a bigger goal. And now, nothing. I remembered something Warren Buffett once said. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. He'd been talking about business, but the truth of it hit me hard. In my case, it took my mother 3 hours to ruin my trust. I set the phone down on the bedspread and stared at the wall. I didn't need a detective to tell me what had happened. The picture from 2 a.m., her hand in my purse, lined up perfectly with these timestamps. Every transaction had taken place within a 2-mile radius of the house. I could almost see the route in my head, down the wet streets, past the shuttered coffee shops, the glow of the bank's ATM in the pre-dawn drizzle. What I couldn't see was who she might have been with, and that was important. My mother rarely did anything alone when it came to money. There was always someone whispering in her ear, someone helping her justify what she wanted to do. I considered confronting her right away, but I knew how that would go. She'd deny everything, call me paranoid, maybe even cry until someone else in the family rushed to her defense. Staying silent felt like letting her get away with it, but I'd been through enough family skirmishes to know there was no winning without proof. Blood may be thicker than water, but no one tells you how hard it is to scrub off when it turns toxic. I slid out of bed and moved quietly to my desk. My fingers flew over the phone screen, taking screenshots of every transaction. Each image was saved and emailed to myself, then printed on my home printer. The pages were warm in my hands as I stacked them neatly and placed them in my work briefcase, between two folders of client contracts. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about not letting her rewrite the story before I could tell it. My plan was clear. At lunch, I'd go to the bank, talk to someone I trusted, and find out exactly what evidence they could give me. No one in the family would know where I was going or why. By the time the rest of the house woke up, I'd already showered, dressed, and set my briefcase by the door. The rain outside had eased into a light mist, the kind that hangs in the air like an unfinished sentence. I paused in the hallway, looking toward my mother's closed bedroom door. Whatever was behind it, guilt, indifference, or just the same calm she'd had at 2 a.m., it wasn't my concern right now. My trust was gone, and so was my plan to ever play the quiet daughter again. By the time I got back from the bank, the drizzle had turned into a fine mist that clung to my hair and eyelashes. I walked up the front path slowly, trying to process the morning. The conversations at the bank had been measured and polite, but underneath, I'd heard the tension in the teller's voice when I explained what had happened. I'd asked questions, taken notes, kept my tone calm. I was determined to make every step look deliberate. The porch smelled faintly of wet cedar. I could hear the low hum of a television from inside, muffled through the walls, the familiar rhythm of daytime programming my mother kept on even when she wasn't watching. I pulled my keys from my jacket pocket, the one with the little metal house charm I'd carried for years, and slid the silver key into the lock. It didn't turn. I twisted again, slower, pressing the key in all the way, my fingers tightening. Nothing. I stepped back, frowning. That was when I noticed it. The brass on the lock looked newer, brighter, almost too clean compared to the weathered doorknob below it. And dangling from the potted fern beside the door was a small paper tag from a local locksmith, the phone number printed in crisp, black ink. The meaning hit me before I wanted to admit it. I was locked out, not by accident, but by design. Doors aren't just wood and hinges, I thought, staring at the key useless in my hand. They're trust, and mine had just been ripped off the frame. I pulled my phone from my bag and dialed my mother's number. It rang once before going straight to voicemail. I hung up, then called again. On the third try, she answered. "Why is there a new lock on the door?" My voice was level, but there was no mistaking the edge under it. "Oh," she said, almost cheerfully. "I thought you were at work. It's for security. Don't be so dramatic." "For security from who exactly?" I kept my tone measured. "From me? You're imagining problems," she replied, clipped and dismissive. "You've been under a lot of stress. I think you need to calm down." I opened my mouth to push further, but in the background, I heard muffled voices, laughter, the clink of coffee mugs. "Hang on," she said suddenly, and the sound changed. The echo of her voice told me she'd put me on speakerphone. "Tell everyone here what you just accused me of, dear," she said, her tone now loud and performative. The everyone turned out to be my two aunts, Corinne and May, and my cousin Lila. They were probably sitting in the living room, coffee cups in hand, leaning forward with interest. "This isn't a performance, Mom," I said, still keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk about my bank account." "Oh, she thinks I took her money," Zariah said with mock sympathy. "Can you believe that?" Murmurs of disapproval followed. Corinne made a soft tisk sound. Lila muttered something about me always being suspicious. I knew exactly what was happening. In small-town family politics, the first version of the story people hear becomes the truth. And my mother was making sure her version took root before I had the chance to show evidence. I could have shouted back. I could have told them about the screenshots, the timestamps, the $25,000 that had evaporated in the hours between 2 and 5 a.m. But that would have been playing her game, reactive, emotional, easy to paint as unstable. Instead, I shifted. "I'll have proof soon," I said evenly. "We'll revisit this when everyone's ready to hear the facts." No one replied. "Enjoy your coffee," I added, letting the words land without heat, then ended the call before she could get in another jab. I stood there for a moment on the porch, my hair damp from the mist, the smell of damp earth rising from the garden beds. I slipped the useless key back into my jacket pocket. It was still mine, even if it didn't open this door anymore, and that thought steadied me. I walked down the steps and into the yard, pulling out my phone again. My fingers tapped quickly over the screen, drafting a message to the one person I knew would give me a fair hearing. Thorin Blythe, the bank employee I trusted. If my mother wanted an audience for her version, I thought, I'd make sure they were front row when mine played out. I left the porch without looking back, the weight of the conversation still pressing against my ribs. The air off Commencement Bay was sharp and cold, carrying a mix of salt water and diesel from the fishing boats coming in and out. I kept walking until the neighborhood faded into the sound of gulls and the occasional car rolling past. The waterfront coffee shop I'd gone to for years sat on the corner, its wide windows fogged from the warmth inside. I slipped in, grateful for the smell of fresh coffee and the faint hum of conversation. Choosing the table tucked furthest into the corner, I set down my bag and ordered a black coffee. I didn't want comfort, I wanted clarity. When it arrived, I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat sink in as I opened my notebook. I started listing the events of the past 24 hours, but my pen moved beyond that, back to moments I'd brushed aside, the kind that feel small at the time but become loud in hindsight. Patterns began to emerge. 6 months ago, she'd asked if she could borrow my debit card to pick up a few groceries. I didn't think twice. "It's just for bread and milk," she'd said, her voice casual, almost tired. That evening, I noticed a charge for several $100s at a boutique downtown. When I brought it up, she waved it off. "That boutique processes payments for the grocery store next door. Must have gone through their system." She said it like she'd rehearsed it, even managed a smile that made me feel ridiculous for asking. I told myself it wasn't worth an argument over a couple $100s. Now I could see it clearly. When you excuse something like that, you're not avoiding a fight. You're handing over a blueprint for how to take more next time. My grandmother used to say, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." I'd let myself be fooled more than twice. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me, and thought about the text she sent the night before the theft. "Sleep well. Tomorrow, everything will be different." At the time, I'd read it as sentimental, maybe even a sign she was ready to talk about mending things between us. Now, the words took on a different shape. "Everything will be different" sounded less like hope and more like a warning wrapped in a bow. Was it guilt pushing her to send it, or was it some twisted satisfaction, a way of marking the moment before she crossed the line completely? Some people don't apologize. They leave you puzzles instead, little riddles they hope you'll interpret as affection so they never have to admit what they've done. I looked back down at my notes, the timeline beginning to take form. First, the borrowed card, then the boutique charge, then last night's text, and finally the 2 a.m. theft. None of these were isolated incidents. They were steps, carefully taken, leading to the point where she could walk into my room in the middle of the night and take what she wanted without expecting resistance. I'd heard stories from other people about financial abuse in families, how boundaries are chipped away slowly until there's nothing left to defend. This was exactly that, just wearing my mother's face. The conclusion was unavoidable. My next move couldn't come from a place of emotion. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore, it was about strategy. She'd already started spreading her version of the story. If I didn't solidify mine with allies, the truth would die before it had the chance to be heard. I flipped through my contacts, pausing on the names of relatives who'd hinted, carefully, over the years, about their own run-ins with her. An uncle who'd once asked me quietly if Mom ever paid me back for helping her out. A cousin who'd joked, not joking, about locking her purse when Mom visited. I typed short, neutral messages. "We should catch up this week," and "Let's grab lunch. It's been too long." Nothing about money, nothing that would travel back to her as a warning. Just planting seeds. In family conflicts, timing is as important as the truth. If you move too early, they'll close ranks. If you wait too long, they'll rewrite the history entirely. I closed the notebook and slid it back into my bag, feeling the edges of resolve sharpening inside me. The first time she took from me, I let it slide. The second time, I let it sting. There won't be a third. I'd been staring at the rain-streaked windshield for a while before deciding to swing by the small coffee shop on the edge of town. I needed the heat of a mug between my hands and the faint hum of other people's lives to remind me that the world hadn't stopped because mine had taken a hit. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, coffee in hand, Karen Ashford was just coming down the driveway to his mailbox. He'd lived next door to my mother for 20 years, the kind of neighbor who notices everything without making it sound like gossip. "Morning, Ivania," he called over the sound of rain on asphalt. I gave a nod. "Morning, Karen." He hesitated, then glanced toward my mother's house. "You know, I saw your mom yesterday morning, early. She wasn't alone." My grip on the coffee cup tightened. "With who?" "Didn't recognize him," he said, shaking his head. "Tall, mid-50s maybe. They were at the bank branch on Harbor Street." She had one of those thick white envelopes in her hand. Laughing, tossed it onto the passenger seat of a dark green Lexus, out-of-state plates. The rain had been just starting, and Karen remembered how the envelope's edges had darkened where the drops hit it. "Stuck in my head for some reason," he added. I gave a slow nod, the details clicking into place in my mind. Sometimes the smallest details hold the biggest truths, I thought. And now I had two, a man and a car. Back in my own car, I set the coffee in the holder and unlocked my phone. A new email from my realtor lit up the screen. Reminder: down payment funds due in 48 hours. The words felt heavier than they looked. The theft wasn't just a violation. It was now tangled in a deadline that could crush years of work. I opened the message fully, reading the fine print I already knew by heart. Miss the deadline, and I'd lose the condo, lose the deposit, watch my credit score sink. In Tacoma's market, sellers didn't wait. Our extensions were rare, and the listing had already drawn multiple offers. I considered calling, asking for more time, but the idea felt as foolish as hoping my mother might give the money back out of remorse. This wasn't just about recovering what was mine anymore. It was about salvaging the future I'd built one long shift at a time. In the U.S., financial deadlines don't care about family drama. They don't wait for you to clean up the mess someone else made. I replayed Karen's description in my head: the envelope, the unknown man, the Lexus with plates from another state. I opened a new note on my phone and started a list. Bank branch cameras, Lexus plate check, identify the man. A Lexus with out-of-state plates could be a rental or something borrowed, making it harder to track. The bank's security footage only stayed in the system for 14 days. The clock was already ticking. I needed to gather what I could from neighbors and nearby businesses before walking into official channels. Information first, confrontation later, I reminded myself. Driving slowly past the bank branch, I noted every camera, two facing the lot, one by the side entrance, another aimed at the ATM. I parked 2 blocks away, zipped my jacket against the mist, and walked to the corner store next door. Inside, I grabbed a pack of gum and made small talk with the clerk, easing into questions about the parking lot. "Ever notice a dark green Lexus hanging around here?" I asked lightly, as if it were just idle curiosity. He thought for a moment. "Saw one yesterday morning, actually. Guy driving, woman with a white envelope. Didn't buy anything here, though. Headed straight for the bank." "Out-of-state plates?" I asked. "Yeah, Oregon, I think." I paid for the gum, thanked him, and stepped back into the damp air. In small-town inquiries, tone and timing matter. Sound too desperate, and the thread you're following snaps before you find the knot. Back in my car, I glanced one more time at the bank's glass doors, picturing my mother walking through them with that envelope. My phone buzzed. A text from Thorin. "I might have something for you, but we need to talk in person. Whatever was in that envelope might have been my money, and Thorin might have just found the proof." The coffee shop Thorin chose wasn't the kind of place you stumbled into. It sat 2 streets over from the busier part of downtown, half hidden between a dry cleaner and a print shop. The rain followed me in, dripping from my coat as I shook it off. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of fresh ground beans, cinnamon, and something buttery coming from the pastry case. He was already there, tucked into a corner booth away from the window, laptop closed, paper cup in front of him. Even seated, he looked alert, like someone waiting for a signal. I slid into the opposite seat, keeping my voice low. "You didn't get this from me," he said without preamble, his eyes flicking toward the door before returning to mine. I folded my hands on the table, careful to project calm, even as curiosity tightened in my chest. In some wars, your generals aren't the ones charging ahead, they're the ones who know where the landmines are buried. Thorin had that air today. He reached into his briefcase and slid a small black USB drive across the table. CCTV stills, transaction logs, early morning of the withdrawals. I picked it up, turning it between my fingers. "How did you get this?" "Let's just say I had to bypass a few protocols," he replied. "If anyone asks, I'll deny it." His tone was firm, but I caught the flicker of unease in his expression. I pulled my laptop from my bag and connected the drive. The images loaded slowly, grainy, black and white, but clear enough. My mother, at the ATM. Beside her, the same man Karen had described. The green Lexus came into view in the background of one frame, Oregon plates visible. My pulse quickened. Thorin leaned in. "If she finds out you have this, she'll change her play entirely." "I won't use it until the right moment," I assured him. "Timing isn't everything, it's the only thing." We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the espresso machine filling the gap. I closed the laptop, slid the USB into a small inner pocket of my bag, and zipped it shut. "Be careful, Ivania," he said. "This is more than just about money now." "I know," I replied, and I did. Leaving the shop, I stepped back into the drizzle. My phone rang before I'd reached the curb, Aunt Anselma's name flashing on the screen. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "Ivania, dear," she said, her voice warm in that too-sweet way she used when she wanted something. "I heard what happened. If you need someone in your corner, I'm here." I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. "That's kind of you. I'm managing for now." "Well, I just hate to think of you going through this alone. Family should stand together in times like these." "True," I said evenly. "And sometimes it's best to keep things quiet until all the facts are lined up." She hummed her agreement, fishing without asking outright. I kept my responses vague, steering the conversation towards safe topics. In my family, loyalty is a currency, and some people will sell it to the highest bidder. That evening, a message from my cousin landed in my inbox. "Heard Anselma talking to your mom. Mentioned you were meeting someone from the bank." I leaned back in my chair, letting the confirmation settle. She was feeding my mother information, and if she was passing along the truth this easily, she'd pass along a lie just as readily. I opened a blank note and began drafting a piece of controlled misinformation, a false lead about a big meeting that would keep my mother's attention in one place while I moved in another. If they wanted to play telephone, I'd choose the words they passed along. Before bed, I uploaded every file from the USB to a secure cloud account, then locked the physical drive in my office desk. I typed a short text to Anselma. "Big meeting tomorrow. Could change everything." By the time my mother heard about that meeting, I'd be exactly where I wanted her to think I was, and nowhere near the real battlefield. I got to my office earlier than usual, the hallways still quiet except for the hum of the heating system. I closed my door before turning on the light, wanting a clear separation between my day job and the investigation I was running in parallel. My bag hit the chair, and I pulled out the USB drive Thorin had given me, the one I'd copied and locked away. I opened my laptop, slid the drive into the port, and began reviewing each still frame again, slower this time. My eyes scanned the corners, the background reflections, every detail that might have been easy to miss the first time. That's when I saw it. In one shot, as my mother turned slightly away from the ATM camera, her purse gaped open just enough to reveal a folded document. The letterhead at the top was blurred but still recognizable, a local credit union. Money leaves a trail, I thought, leaning closer to the screen. And sometimes that trail is paper. I took a screenshot of the image, noting the timestamp, and decided my next stop wasn't the bank. It was the public library's Business Research Center, where the city's finance records could be accessed without raising any alarms. By mid-morning, I was sitting at one of the library's public terminals, the smell of paper and coffee faint in the air. I typed my name into the county's public finance database, expecting to find nothing. Instead, my breath caught. There it was, my name listed as co-signer on a secured loan. I clicked into the record. The amount, $15,000. Issued 3 months ago. Primary borrower, Zariah Creed. I opened the scanned contract, and my stomach turned. The signature at the bottom looked like mine at a glance, but I knew instantly it was forged. The loops were wrong, the slant unnatural. Someone had practiced, but not well enough. They say a good signature can open doors, I thought bitterly. In my case, it's been used to lock me out of my own future. Even if I recovered the stolen $25,000, this loan would hang over me, damaging my credit, leaving a black mark every time I applied for something important. I pulled out my phone and began photographing each page of the contract. Every line was evidence. Every page was another nail in the case I was building. Leaving the library, the cold air hit me like a wall. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 3 messages from friends, 2 from colleagues, then 1 from a mutual acquaintance I hadn't heard from in months, along with a screenshot. It was a social media post from my mother. The text was vague but sharp-edged. Sad to see family members waste their lives on shopping sprees and then blame others when the bills come due. Some people never learn responsibility. Underneath, hashtags, #family disappointment, #financial responsibility. She didn't have to name me. Everyone who knew us would know. My jaw tightened, but I didn't let the anger take over. This was confirmation. She was laying the groundwork for her defense, discredit me before I could present the facts. An American saying popped into my head. If you can't attack the facts, attack the person. I walked 2 blocks before stopping at a bench and opening my notes app. I drafted a calm, factual response, but didn't post it. I wasn't going to fight this battle on her chosen stage. Instead, I took a screenshot of her post, saved it in a folder marked defamation, and archived it alongside the forged loan contract. In any argument, the one who stays calm looks like they're telling the truth. I'd hold my fire until I could drop the forged loan evidence and the smear campaign side by side, letting them undercut each other. Back at my office, I sealed the printed loan documents in a large envelope and wrote across it in thick black marker, "For attorney review." It sat heavily on my desk, a reminder of the ticking clock. My calendar showed the realtor's condo payment deadline, now less than 36 hours away. My time was running out, but my case against her was getting stronger by the hour. The knock at my apartment door was firm, but not hurried, the kind that makes you hesitate before opening it. I glanced through the peephole and saw Cairn Ashford, his jacket zipped to the chin against the chill, a flash drive pinched between 2 fingers. "I pulled some strings," he said as soon as I opened the door, his voice low. "Thought you might want to see this in private." I stepped aside to let him in. "Coffee?" I asked, already heading toward the kitchen. He nodded, setting the drive on the table. "A buddy in city traffic management owed me. I got access to the street cams near Harbor Street from the morning everything went down." The smell of brewing coffee filled the small space as I slid the flash drive into my laptop. The footage opened in a simple viewer, time-stamped and grainy but clear enough to make my stomach tighten. There was the green Lexus easing up to the curb outside the bank. I froze the frame just as the passenger door opened. My mother stepped out, clutching a white envelope. Lucan Maris sat in the driver's seat, his head turning in a quick sweep of the street, shoulders tense. Even a stolen moment on the street leaves its shadow behind, I thought. Cairn leaned over my shoulder. "You can match this to the bank footage?" I clicked to the next file on my computer. Thorin's USB. The timestamps matched within minutes. Side by side, the images formed a chain. ATM withdrawal, envelope in hand, the Lexus waiting. Lucan's jacket in the street cam matched the faint reflection in the ATM glass. "This is clean enough for court," I said quietly. "Then move fast," Cairn warned. "They don't keep street cam footage forever. A week from now, this is gone." I copied every file twice, one set to an encrypted drive, another to cloud storage. Each transfer felt like tightening a net around my mother. I had just finished archiving when my phone buzzed. A message from Thorin. "Call me now. Urgent." He picked up on the first ring. "Ivania, I need to be quick. My branch manager asked about unauthorized data access. I think your mother's been fishing around." His tone was tight, the background hum of the bank faint behind him. "If they dig too far, I'm done. They'll cut me off." My grip on the phone tightened. "Then step back. You've done enough." "Not yet," he said. "But I may not be able to give you anything else. Be smart." When your strongest ally starts to wobble, I thought after hanging up, you either find another anchor or you learn to swim alone. I spread the evidence across my table. Thorin's USB, Cairn's street cam files, the screenshots of the forged loan. Together, they formed a picture no one could ignore. But it wouldn't be enough to drop it quietly. I needed a stage. There were a few upcoming family gatherings, the kind where everyone showed up, even the ones who avoided each other all year. Perfect places to lay it all out, one piece after another, with no way for her to cut me off or spin the story before it landed. I began drafting a timeline for presentation. Start with the bank transactions, then the ATM stills, then the street cam, ending with the forged loan contract. Each piece would lead into the next, closing every door to denial. The idea sent a spark of adrenaline through me, tempered by the steady calm of knowing I was in control. Late that night, I was shutting down my laptop when my phone chimed. A text from an unknown number. Tacoma area code. "We need to talk. I know what your mother is planning next. No name, no details." If this was a trap, I was already walking into it, but with my own map in hand. I knew from the moment the invitation arrived that this casual lunch wasn't about food. Zariah didn't host anything without an angle, and her sudden enthusiasm for bringing everyone together was a dead giveaway. Still, I agreed to come. If she wanted to play on home turf, I'd walk straight into the lion's den, with my own plan tucked under my arm. Grandma's old craftsman-style house looked the same as it had my entire life. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, the scent of roast chicken drifting through the air, mingling with the sharper smell of coffee that always seemed to be brewing here. From inside, I could hear the rise and fall of voices, laughter here, hushed murmurs there. In the living room, people were positioned like chess pieces. My aunts and uncles clustered along one side of the couch, cousins spread out in chairs and along the window seat. I made a mental note of who smiled genuinely and who avoided eye contact. Zariah swept in from the kitchen, all honeyed politeness, and guided me toward the center. "So glad you could make it," she said, her hand brushing my arm as though we were close. Inside, I thought, if you want to fight on their turf, you'd better come with your own map. She took her seat in the middle of the room like a judge preparing to hear a case. On her lap rested a thick family photo album, the kind with worn leather edges. She flipped it open, smiling at the images as though they were fond memories, then began her performance. "Look at this one," she said, turning the album toward the room. A younger me stared back from a holiday photo, caught mid-bite at a crowded table. Always the one taking the biggest piece before anyone else had a chance. A ripple of polite laughter circled the room. Page after page, the same routine. She pointed to moments from birthdays, vacations, gatherings, each followed by a comment carefully packaged as humor. "Remember this trip?" She complained the whole time about the hotel room, never satisfied. "Oh, here's when she stormed off at Easter because she didn't get her way." Some relatives chuckled along, others shifted in their seats, eyes darting between us. I stayed quiet, letting her spool out the rope. Inside, I thought, let the rope spool out far enough, and they'll hang themselves with it. Then, a shift. Selva Marchand, my cousin who'd hinted before at her own issues with Zariah, cleared her throat. "You know, Aunt Zariah," she said, her voice calm but clear. "That reminds me of the time you borrowed money from me, $2,000. Said you'd pay it back the next month. That was, what, 6 years ago?" The room quieted. Another uncle spoke up. "Same here. Mine was for some car repair. Never saw that money again." The air changed. Zariah's court had turned into her cross-examination. Her smile faltered, the album resting heavier in her lap. She waved a hand. "Oh, please. We're just reminiscing. No need to get serious." I felt the moment arrive. I stood, letting the movement draw every gaze in the room. "I've been quiet today out of respect," I began, my voice even. "But since we're talking about borrowed money, I should add my own story." I didn't launch into every detail, just enough to jolt the room's attention. Earlier this week, $25,000 disappeared from my account, withdrawn in the middle of the night. I know exactly where it went. A few relatives shifted forward in their seats. Others froze, eyes flicking between me and Zariah. "And," I added, "I have proof. Which is why this gathering couldn't have come at a better time." There was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough to let everyone's mind race. In family politics, you don't win by shouting, you win by making them lean in. Zariah's laugh broke the tension. It was sharp, dismissive. "Oh, you and your proof, always the dramatic one." I smiled. Not the kind you give to calm a room, but the kind that says you've already set the next move in motion. "We'll see who's dramatic once everyone sees what I have." And with that, I knew the next time we were in the same room, the balance would tip, for good. I arrived before anyone else, the long dining table already set with coffee cups and small plates, the smell of lemon polish clinging to the wood. I chose a seat at the far end where I could see everyone's faces at once. The head of the table left conspicuously open for Zariah. The laptop bag stayed beside me, close enough that I could rest my arm on it. The weight of what was inside wasn't just physical, it was the sum of every sleepless night and calculated step over the last week. One by one, relatives trickled in. Zariah entered last, sweeping to her place like she'd been crowned for the occasion. Her allies sat to her right and left, leaning in before she even spoke. The rest of the family dotted the table, some with guarded eyes, some with the politeness of people who had already chosen a side. The air had a brittle quality, half polite chatter, half silent calculation. I watched the way people sat, the angles of their bodies, the subtle tilts toward or away from her. You can tell how a battle will go by where people sit before it starts. When Zariah began, her tone was warm, but threaded with judgment. "Family should support each other, not spread lies," she said, letting her gaze sweep the table. Heads nodded. A few eyes flicked toward me, waiting. I stayed silent, letting her story spool out without interruption. She spoke about betrayal, about the pain of having those closest to you turn against you. Fingers tapped against the table, arms crossed, the ones still unsure were shifting in their seats, wanting something solid to lean on. When she finally stopped, I asked evenly, "Would everyone here be willing to see proof before deciding who's telling the truth?" The room stilled. No one answered, but no one objected either. That was all the opening I needed. I stood, walked to the end of the table where the TV sat against the wall, and connected my laptop. The first video filled the screen, grainy black and white footage from the bank's ATM camera. There was Zariah, head down, focused on the machine. Beside her stood Lucan Maris, glancing over his shoulder. The timestamp matched the withdrawals to the minute. I let that image sit before clicking to the next file. Street camera footage from Cairns' contact. The green Lexus rolled into view, the white envelope visible in Zariah's hand as she stepped out. Lucan in the driver's seat scanning the area, the faintest flicker of a smile on her face as she shut the door. The room went utterly silent. The hum of the refrigerator in the adjoining kitchen was suddenly deafening. One aunt's hand covered her mouth. An uncle shifted in his chair, eyes narrowing. Selva nodded slowly, her expression grim. I paused the video. "That's where my $25,000 went," I said, my voice calm. "Facts don't shout. They just stand there, unshakable." Zariah's recovery was quick, but not quick enough to hide the flash of panic in her eyes. "It was for a family emergency," she said, sitting straighter. "She's twisting the story. I didn't think I'd have to defend myself to my own blood." She pulled out her phone. "Some of you have seen my post." She began to read. "There is nothing worse than being betrayed by your own. Sometimes people you love will invent lies to cover their own failings." The hashtags rolled off her tongue. Hatch family disappointment, a truth will prevail. A murmur rippled down the table. I recognized the moment. "That post," I said, "was meant to poison this conversation before it happened. It's hearsay. What you've just seen," I tapped the paused frame of her with the envelope. Is time-stamped truth. The comparison hung in the air. Her words against her image, one built on narrative, the other on evidence. The murmurs grew louder, some turning toward her now, questions in their eyes. She opened her mouth again, but this time others spoke over her. Why didn't you say anything before? You told me she was making it up. I closed the laptop, the sound sharp in the stillness. I didn't come here to win, I said, rising from my seat. I came here to stop pretending. As I walked toward the door, the low hum of arguments behind me, I realized Zariah wasn't finished, and neither was I. 2 days had passed since the video meeting, and the house was quieter than it had been in months. My phone barely lit up. No group texts, no forced invitations, not even the "how are you" calls that used to mask curiosity as concern. The people who'd once hovered on the edge of my life had retreated, some out of embarrassment, others because they were regrouping. In family disputes, silence can mean surrender. It can also mean someone's sharpening their next strike. I couldn't tell which I was dealing with, so I treated it like both. The quiet gave me room to work. I spread everything across my desk. Bank statements, stills from the ATM, street camera captures, the forged loan contract, and copies of the social media smear post. One by one, I slid each document into a protective sleeve, labeling the sections so a stranger could understand the timeline without my explanation. When I sealed it all into a thick folder marked for legal review, a strange calm settled in. Paper doesn't lie. It doesn't try to charm you or twist the truth. And mine was ready to speak in court if it had to. The next morning, my phone rang. Selva's name lit up the screen. "You'll want to hear this," she said. We agreed to meet at a small diner on the outskirts of Tacoma, the kind of place where the coffee's hot but never great, and nobody listens to the booth beside them. She slid into the seat across from me, her expression taut. A friend in law enforcement looked into Luke and Maris. He's got a record: fraud, targeting older women, Oregon, Idaho, and one case here that never made it to trial. My fingers tightened around the mug. Same method? Identical, she said. Builds trust, gains access to finances, then drains accounts and disappears. The women didn't go public. Some were embarrassed, others were pressured into settling quietly. The weight of her words wasn't a surprise, but it landed all the same. This wasn't an isolated mistake or a one-time favor gone wrong. It was a pattern, and patterns hold up in court. This goes in the file, I told her. But it stays out of the family rumor mill, she nodded. Understood. Reputation might be invisible, but it weighs heavy when it's dragged into the light. That afternoon, I sat across from a trusted attorney in an office lined with framed certificates and shelves of thick law books. I laid out the case in order. The forged loan, the withdrawals, the videos, Lucan's record. He watched, silent, except for the occasional question. When the last piece was on the table, he leaned back. Your chain of evidence is strong. We can go after civil recovery and push for criminal charges. If the DA sees this, they'll have a hard time ignoring it. I signed the retainer paperwork. The pen felt heavier than it should, but with each stroke, something uncoiled inside me. I'd stopped hoping for her to admit what she'd done. Now I was building the system that would force her to face it. You can't control the waves, but you can learn to surf. The saying popped into my head, and for the first time, it didn't feel like wishful thinking. By evening, word had already started to circulate. A neutral cousin called, his voice cautious. I heard you met with an attorney today. Of course. News traveled in this family faster than it traveled through official channels. I pictured Zariah hearing it, her mind scrambling to figure out what I had, what I'd do next. This time, I didn't rush to control the story. Let her stew. Let the anticipation build. Justice isn't always about verdicts. It's also about reclaiming the space in people's minds, the one they thought they could occupy without question. Later, as I was shutting down my laptop for the night, an email pinged into my inbox. The subject line read, "You're not the only one she's done this to." I opened it. Scanned documents filled the screen. Another victim's case file. Same names, same pattern. dated 5 years ago. If this was the past catching up, it wasn't just mine, it was hers, and it was coming fast. The text from my cousin came on a Thursday night. Let's have a peace talk at my place this Saturday. Just you and your mom. I'll keep it neutral. It read like an olive branch, but I knew better. This was a stage, and stages could be claimed. I sat at my desk with a legal pad, sketching out the seating, the order of conversation, the cues I'd wait for. The harmless summary I'd prepared would sit on top of the stack, the real statement hidden just beneath it. The goal wasn't to ambush with noise, it was to let her walk straight into my terms. A trap works best when the target believes they set the table. Saturday morning, I pulled into my cousin's driveway early. The air was damp and cool, the kind that carried every sound. Inside, the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls. My cousin greeted me warmly, pointing to the dining table where 4 chairs had been set, 2 on each side. The other 2 seats would belong to Aunt Marianne and Selva, both observers. Zoraya arrived 10 minutes later, wearing a soft gray cardigan and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She sat across from me, clasping her hands like someone preparing to heal a rift. "Thank you for coming," she began, her tone measured and generous in a way meant to sound sincere. "I hate how this has turned into, whatever it is. We're family." I nodded, giving her nothing to push against. "I want to clear the air too." The more she spoke, the more I agreed, on small, meaningless points. I let her talk uninterrupted, even leaned forward as if considering her words. The performance was working. Her shoulders loosened, her voice softened. She thought she was steering. When the moment felt right, I reached into my folder and slid the top page across the table. "This is just a quick outline of the situation as I see it," I said lightly. "So we're on the same page." She skimmed it, eyes flicking, finding nothing alarming. "I was thinking," I added casually, "maybe we sign something for closure, just a mutual understanding that we can both refer to if this comes up again in the family." I pulled the second document from the stack, this one worded with careful precision, acknowledging the withdrawal of funds, the forged loan, and that both were done without my consent. I'd titled it a clarification for family records. Zoraya didn't hesitate. She picked up the pen my cousin slid over and signed in her usual looping style. Selva's eyes flicked to mine, and she gave the barest nod. She thought she was securing her story. She was actually securing mine. I slid the paper back into my folder, tucking it between the USB drive, the photos, and the contracts. I stood, smoothing my jacket. "Thank you. This will go directly to my attorney on Monday." It took a second for the shift to register. Her smile froze, then faltered. "Wait, what exactly did I just sign?" "You read it," I said evenly. "And they saw you sign it." I gestured to the witnesses. "We'll honor what's been agreed to." Aunt Marianne, perhaps sensing the depth of what had just happened, spoke up. "Best to keep our word once it's in writing." Zoraya's gaze darted to Selva, who only sipped her coffee. There was no way to claw it back now without admitting she hadn't bothered to read it. I left without raising my voice, without gloating. The weight I'd been carrying for years didn't vanish, but it shifted. Off my shoulders and onto a piece of paper that could no longer be denied. On the porch, my phone buzzed. A text from my attorney. "Court date confirmed. This will move fast." I glanced back through the open doorway. Zoraya was still seated, eyes fixed on me, as if she couldn't decide whether she'd just lost or was still playing. For the first time, I wasn't walking away from her. I was walking towards something entirely mine. Monday morning, the courthouse steps felt solid under my feet, the weight of my folder steady in my hands. Inside were the signed confession from last week, every photograph, every statement, each page in the exact order my attorney had insisted on. The air inside smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the echo of quiet conversations bouncing off polished wood and marble. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Zoraya sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the floor while her attorney leaned in, whispering with quick, clipped urgency. I kept my gaze forward, the signed statement heavy in my mind. When the judge entered, the room settled into a hush. My attorney began by presenting the timeline, sliding each piece of evidence forward with deliberate calm. The judge skimmed the documents but stopped at the signed confession, her brow lifting slightly. It was the moment we both knew mattered most. Zariah's lawyer tried to minimize it, suggesting it was signed under misunderstanding, but the witnesses' affidavits undercut the claim in seconds. The judge's decision came without drama. Immediate repayment schedule, formal acknowledgement of the forged loan, and a restraining order that would keep her at least 200 feet away from me and my home. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs a piece of paper and changes your life. After court, I drove straight to my new apartment, a modern loft with tall windows and a lock I'd chosen myself. The key turned easily, the sound clean and certain. Stepping inside, I paused just beyond the door, feeling the space like it was an extension of my own skin. No ghosts here, no one else's permission needed. I set my briefcase on the counter. The signed confession, now just another document in my file, no longer carried weight. It had done its job. Your home should be your story, I thought, not someone else's chapter. That evening, I sat at my small kitchen table with a plain white postcard. In steady handwriting, I wrote, "A new lock won't keep out the truth. No return address, no signature, just the sentence." I slid it into an envelope, sealed it, and walked it to the blue mailbox on the corner. The sound of it dropping inside was final, like the punctuation on a sentence I'd been writing for years. Not to reopen the fight, just to remind her who closed it. A week later, the mornings had taken on a new rhythm. Coffee by the window, my laptop open to projects that were mine alone. No unexpected knocks, no calls I didn't want to answer. Some relatives had reached out quietly, their words cautious but supportive, now that the truth was too solid to ignore. I chose distance. Peace meant more than patching something that had been rotten for years. Strength isn't always confrontation. Sometimes it's walking away and never looking back. Freedom isn't the absence of enemies, it's the absence of their access to you. On a bright Friday morning, I locked my apartment door before heading out for a walk. The deadbolt clicked into place, firm and final. This time, the lock was mine, and no one else would ever turn it.